So India is fast approaching its general elections in 2024. That's when we get to decide who becomes the central government and who becomes the prime minister of the country over the next few years. Now, as a lead up to those elections, I've decided to put together a few factors that us as Indian citizens should be looking at that will help us choose and make good decisions on who we put at the helm of things in the coming year. Now, I will be making a series of videos, and this one is the first of those series in which I'll be talking about these 5 things very briefly and follow that up by getting into more details of each of those 5 things in the upcoming videos. So if you like this kind of content, please like this video and please subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss the upcoming videos and the discussions we're going to have in those. Alright, so now I looked at a few factors on the internet and looked at a few things that help decide globally on whether a country is good to live in or not. And some of these factors obviously are also very close to us as Indians, and hence I have shortlisted these 5 factors. Now, the first one that I want to talk about obviously is about the economy of the country. Now, that is measured in GDP or gross domestic product. Now, India is the 5th largest economy in the world, but that is primarily due to the size of the country. To be specific, the large population. It apparently seems like we've recently crossed China to become the most populated country in the world. And so that is why our GDP is as big as it is. But to understand if the citizens of a country are really doing that well or not, there is something called as GDP per capita that we can look at. Now, GDP per capita means that you take the GDP of the country and you divide it by its population. So it becomes GDP per capita or per person. And that helps decide how well is each of the citizens of that country doing. Now, it's a grim picture there because from being the 5th largest economy in the world, when we look at GDP per capita, India's rank drops drastically from 5 to 139. Now, that's a huge slip in terms of the ranking. But that means that there is so much more that India can do to improve its position in the GDP per capita. Now, we apparently are about $2,600 if you look at GDP per capita or per person, and compare that to the US, for example, which is somewhere about 20,000 or more. So that's about 10 times more GDP per capita as compared to India. Now, our GDP per capita has been improving over the last few years, so let's not take away the credit, but it still means that we have so much more to go because we are 139th in the ranking if we look at that particular bit. The second one that I want to talk about, I think is also very close to our heart, is the corruption in the country. When you look at the corruption index, India ranks 85th in the world out of 180 countries. Now, obviously here, the better your ranking or the lesser the corruption is. And so the top spots go to countries like Denmark and Norway. So obviously there is probably a thing or two that we can learn from these countries to help curb corruption in our country. Now, maybe not all solutions that they deploy will be applicable here in India because we've got our own problems. We've got our own corruption. And so we might need our own solutions to solve for that. But having said that, India does need some plan to help curb the corruption. The Jan Lokpal bill that Anna Hazare was fighting for a few years ago, I'm sure all of you will remember, could be one of such solutions. Now, I'm not an expert on the bill, so I'm not really sure if that is the bill that we need, but we do need something to help bring the corruption down. The third factor I want to talk about are the crime rates in the country. Now, if you look at that, India ranks 81 out of 144 in terms of crime rate. Now, you can say that this can be a little controversial too because crime rates and the way that they are measured is based off of how many crimes have been reported. To talk about an example, if you look at the states in India, Kerala apparently has the highest crime rate and UP apparently has the lowest crime rates. But that may not necessarily be a true depiction of how crime is on the ground. It probably may be because the people in Kerala are a lot more open in reporting a crime without the fear of repercussions, as an example, than how the people in UP are. But having said that, we do want a safe country, a place where we can go anywhere in the country, and no matter what time of the day or what time of the night, if we feel safe, then that means that the crime rates have gone down. And we do definitely need something along the lines of reducing the crimes in India. The fourth thing that I want to talk about is the infrastructure in the country. And when I say infrastructure, we're talking about the roads, availability of electricity to the general public, availability of clean, good water to the general public, so on and so forth. Now, the infrastructure in the country obviously again has improved by leaps and bounds over the last few years, but there's a lot more to be desired, I'm sure. As an example, if you live in one of the big cities, you would be one of those people that really would like to see good roads without potholes and well-paved roads across the city. Even the city planning, if can be made better. By that I mean, for example, if you can ease the traffic woes in some of the big cities. If you're living in Bangalore, you probably must have heard this, that Bangalore was recently named as the second worst city in the world in terms of traffic jams. So urbanization does that. Right, where a lot of people suddenly come and stay in the same place because of the economic growth in that city, and hence you see traffic wars. Now, this problem is not just with India. Even countries like the US and UK are struggling with traffic problems in some of their big cities like London and New York. So it's a global issue, but we need to have some way to solve before it becomes too much of a problem for us. So it might be by planning smart infrastructure within the cities so that it helps decrease the traffic jams. Or maybe we could adopt something like how Australia does, where the number of mega cities in Australia is really huge. Whereas in India, for example, we do have big cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Calcutta, Bangalore, Pune, Hyderabad. You can name a few, but then you can count them on the hand and the fingers, right? But we need maybe a lot more big mega cities so that a big chunk of the population does not necessarily get attracted to only one place, and the population is more spread, and maybe, you never know, that may help ease the traffic problem. I'm not saying this is the solution, but we do need smart solutions in order to improve the infrastructure of this country. And the last thing I want to talk about, the fifth factor, is something called as the Human Development Index, or HDI in short. Now, this index is measured on three things mainly: the health of the general public, the knowledge of the general public, and the standard of living. Let's talk a little bit more about each of these three. So firstly, the health. Now, we should take pride in the fact that India is known to be one of those countries where medical treatments are available at a far cheaper rate as compared to some of the other big countries in Europe or even in the US, for example. A lot of the times you must have read this on the news channels or even heard people quote, like I remember President Obama quoting that in one of his speeches, on how it is much cheaper to get the same kind of medical treatment in India as compared to some of these other countries. So that's a great thing. Having said that though, in India, privatization of hospitals and privatization of insurance plans, it's also resulting in having the same medical treatment at different rates within our country. So if you look at, for example, going to a government hospital and get treated for something, for the same treatment, if you were to walk into a private hospital in the country, you might have to pay 10 times more than what you did in the government hospital. And that's within the same country. So there definitely needs to be more regulation around that so that good hygienic medical treatments are more accessible to the general public. There's also another factor. Some of the countries abroad have this public health insurance plans that is provided by the government and is funded through the tax that they pay. Now, India doesn't have something like that, but it would be great to have something along those lines. Now, I know that the population in India is obviously the biggest in the world, and so it's not going to be an easy task to provide public health insurance to everyone. But some measure in that or some step in that direction should be taken so that the fact that we have good and cheap medical treatment available in the country, that can be used as an advantage, and this can be then made available to more of the public around. And obviously then this helps improve the lifespan of the population in India. The second thing, or the second factor that HDI is measured on, is the knowledge of the general population. This obviously boils down to the education in the country. So improving the public education in the country is required. Now, it does not just necessarily mean more schools and more colleges. That could be one of the solutions, but the quality of education available in the country should also be looked at. The syllabus that people are going through, is it still the one that we need? Have we moved with the times, and do we have the right thing to make our students successful in the future? And we talk about, some of the big top schools of the country like IIM and IIT. Now, they seem to be producing the top cream of the crowd, the most successful people in the country year on year. And so does that mean that we need more schools like those? But you see, it's not just the kind of education that's imparted in these institutions that is the reason for their success. A lot of their success gets attributed to their entrance exam. And what I mean by that, so as an example, the CAT exam that you need to clear to get into institutions such as the IIM. Now, you've got to score 99% or more in order to secure an admission in any of these institutions. What that means is then these colleges or these top business schools are actually hiring students that are already brilliant and their intellect is already high. Maybe their IQ is really, really great already. So these kind of students are already destined for success, regardless of whether they get into an IIM or they go through a different college. I think the measure of a college's success should be based off of the fact that how much of a change have they been able to bring in a person's intellect from the time that they get in to the time that they actually graduate. As an example, and this is just a crude example, if somebody's IQ is, let's say, 80 when they get into a college or a school, and by the time they pass out, if their IQ has gone up to 120, now that is good improvement. The kind of knowledge that's imparted in that institution, in that school or college, is really good. Unlike that, for example, if you look at institutions such as IIM, the person getting in probably already is at an IQ of 120. And maybe when they pass out, they go to 130. Now, there is an improvement, but not as much as you saw from 80 to 120. I think the measure of a college should be based off of that. And India needs more of such colleges, more of such curriculum, syllabus, and more colleges and schools that are dedicated in improving a person's intellect and not necessarily concentrating on the kind of results that they produce at the end of each year. And the third factor for the HDI, or Human Development Index, is the standard of living. Now, this is kind of a culmination of all of the factors that we've been talking about so far, right? If you have a good health system, a good education system, if your GDP per capita is really high, corruption is less, crime rates are less, infrastructure is good, obviously it translates into a really good standard of living for the citizens of a country. So anyways, HDI is made up of these three, and in that index, India stands at a 132nd rank out of 190 countries that were surveyed, and it's the United Nations basically that does this study. So you see, 132 means that we've got so much more that we can do to improve ourselves in that ranking as well. So I think these are the 5 factors that we should be looking at as citizens of India and expect the next government to help improve in these areas so that our nation moves from where it is to newer highs, and that then a collective progress translates then to individual progress, obviously. Because if the country becomes better in these standings, it obviously means that you and I will have a better life, we'll probably have more money in our pockets, more money to spare, and overall a better quality of life in this country. Now let me know if you agree, and which of these 5 factors do you think is more important to you, or the most important to you? Or maybe there's a factor that I haven't talked about in this video that you think should be something that we should be looking at in the next year for the government to look at and make this country even better than what it is now. Stay tuned for the next few videos in the series where we talk about each of these 5 factors in a little bit more detail. So please subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you in the next video.